Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're ready to start. We are so glad to have all of you here with us tonight, our Foothills Forum supporters and friends. We're so excited to have our special guests, Judy and Al Hunt. And a special thanks to Dee and Chuck Ackrey for providing this beautiful venue. Just such a beautiful place. I'm Emily Oakes, and I'm the Executive Director of Foothills Forum, and I'd like to just briefly introduce our board. If all of our board members could stand up and show us who you are. We're so pleased. You guys do so many things behind the scenes. Thank you so much. And our journalists, please, any Foothills Forum journalists, editors, reporters, photographers, please stand up. Yes. They are the professionals on the ground doing the day-to-day coverage that keeps our community informed and thriving. And thanks again, everyone, for coming tonight. I'm going to turn the time over now to Andy Alexander, who is our board chair, and he will get to the meat of the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Well, thank you for coming. I hope all of you had a chance to look at this gallery that was on the big screen here. This is the product of Pete Smith, who is too modest to be identified much. But Pete, in addition to being a great board member, Pete is a phenomenal photographer. And I think if you watched that, you saw how many people are now involved with Foothills Forum. Many, many people on a volunteer level, and so we greatly appreciate that. We are here tonight, basically, let me just put you at ease. We are going to start asking you for money in a couple weeks, but this is not a fundraiser tonight. This is basically to thank all of you for helping us. Many of you do financially, but many of you do it in other ways by providing story tips, or you might be experts on research on stories. So all of that works together. You know, if you look back at the previous annual meetings we've had, going all the way back to when Bud Meyer was our chair and our co-founder, and Bill Deedle, late Bill Deedle, who was so instrumental as a co-founder, every one of those annual gatherings like this, there was a little discussion of gloom and doom about how terrible the future was for local news. And I hate to tell you, that is still the case, all right? But tonight, we have some good news. We are actually bucking the trends on what's going on in America, and it's largely because of people like you. We have a lot of things to celebrate. If you look back just in the last year alone, in the annual competition for journalistic excellence in the state of Virginia, the Rappahannock News was judged the best weekly of its size in Virginia for the 5th consecutive year. And thank you, Dennis. I'll be immodest and say I think we had a lot to do with that, but it's a partnership, all right? And then if you look at just the Foothills Forum recognition by the Virginia Press Association going up against all the other news organizations in Virginia, we had our greatest year ever. And if you look back over the past 5 years, we've won more than 80 awards for excellence, and almost half of them are first place, and often against the Washington Post and other big news organizations. So we're proud of that. And then one other little data point that I find interesting. An organization did a study not long ago looking at the number of reporters in communities per capita. And of the 3,142 counties in America, Rappahannock ranks 19th highest. And the reason for that is of this partnership between Foothills Forum and the Rappahannock News. It basically gives us more reporting strength that translates into keeping the community reliably informed. So that leads us to tonight. As I say, we're not out of the woods on local news. That's still a major problem. But we have someone here to talk about it. Judy Woodruff. Let's give it up for Judy again, all right? And a bonus tonight, Al Hunt, her husband. So, and just a fun fact about Al that I didn't know, although I've known these people for decades now. He grew up in Orange, Virginia. Yes, so close enough, we'll claim you, all right? And he baled hay in the summer. Okay, so big deal, all right? Our kind of people. So anyhow, you know Judy from her career. I mean, she's come into your household for decades now. She is one of the most respected, best-known broadcast journalists in America. And Al, similarly, longtime bureau chief with the Wall Street Journal, including when Tim Carrington worked there, and you see him on TV all the time. Judy, after a long career with NBC, covering everything from the Carter White House and international events, CNN, and then, as you probably know her most, from the PBS NewsHour, she stepped away as anchor and managing editor of the NewsHour a couple years ago. And what she's been doing since that time is a lot of really great in-depth reporting on what's happening in America, but with a focus often on local news. So we want to just show very briefly, like a 90-second clip from one of her stories.
While that nonprofit model is showing promise in urban settings, economic realities persist for small local newspapers that still depend on subscriptions and advertising, like the Recorder in Virginia.
The traditional news model has just vanished.
Northwestern University's Penny Abernathy has done extensive research on local journalism. She posits that more than 90% of all news organizations are still commercially based, and news organizations benefiting from nonprofit dollars are geographically uneven.
It leaves smaller communities kind of at a loss as to how do you go about getting that initial ignition that brings people together and helps them understand that they can do this, that they can raise that money to support local news operations.
She says one solution might be using public dollars to help local newsrooms survive, subsidies for hiring reporters, and for local businesses that advertise in the local paper.
There just isn't sufficient subscriber revenue to pay the bills, and of course, there's not sufficient philanthropic dollars to lift them up over the profit margin.
The challenges ahead are great, and the stakes are very high.
Increasingly, I'm worried that we're evolving into a nation of journalistic haves and have-nots. That has huge implications for not only our democracy, but for our society. How do we come together around a common set of facts to solve the issues that are confronting us in the 21st century?
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Judy Woodruff in Jackson, Mississippi, and Monterey, Virginia.
So we all know the consequences of when local news disappears. You have a lack of civic engagement, voter participation plummets, disinformation spreads typically on local social media channels, it's unverified. You have polarization that explodes, and then you don't have the watchdog role over what's happening in government. And the result is often higher taxes, inefficiency, and all that. That's what's at stake here. So what we're going to do tonight is have Tim Carrington, our star reporter. Thank you, Tim. And a great artist, by the way. Tim is going to talk with Judy about this subject for maybe a half an hour, and then we're going to turn it over to you. We'll have some people with microphones to run around, so we know the age of our audience. You don't have to get up and stand there. So, but you will have an opportunity to ask questions. So let me turn it over to you, Tim.
I want to start with something quite basic to the act of journalism, which is asking the key questions. And night after night on the NewsHour and elsewhere, you brought in people who knew something, and you asked them in so many words, what really happened? and what does it mean to the rest of us, and what might happen next? And often those questions led to establishing a shared set of facts, which was a phrase we just heard mentioned in the piece from Virginia. A shared set of facts for all of us. And what I'm wondering as we get started is, are we still asking those sorts of questions? And are we still interested in a shared set of facts?
Well, it's such a good initial, a good way to start this conversation. Thank you, Tim. And I have to do what politicians do, which is say something, which is to thank Kathy Trost, who reached out to me to ask me to be with you tonight over there. My dear pal who worked at the Wall Street Journal, and of course Andy Alexander, who drove Al and me all the way from Washington, D.C. out here this afternoon. So I'm really glad to be here. But Tim, to answer your question, we're still asking those questions. Those, to me, facts are the fundamentals of journalism. We're seeking the facts. We're seeking evidence, information, anything that bolsters whatever it is that we're writing or that we're reporting. That's what it's all about. So we're still asking those questions. But to your point, yes, we are at a place where people have, because they can pick and choose where they go to get their information, people have different sets of facts, different sets of, and in a more complex way, different ways of looking at issues and only looking at issues through a particular lens that tracks the facts they want to pay attention to while pushing the other facts over to the side. I think this is frankly the case on both sides. I think there's some of that on both sides. I would argue there's more of it on the right, but it's there on both sides. And why do we have it this way? It's technology, it's the beloved internet, which there are days when I wish the internet would completely go away, and social media, as much as we love what it's been able to do for us, but that is why we are where we are. We can now turn to this cable channel or that one or this website or that one or this social media platform or that one and spend all our day on that. So we do not have a shared set of facts. It's something that I spend a lot of time worrying about right now.
Yes. And you worked very hard, it seemed, throughout to be even-handed. And I remember so many times you would have two people who every now and then would seem to each have a distinct set of facts. And you were trying to do your best for an audience that you knew was wanting some clarity about issues that you were looking at. And yet here were two people who were kind of not necessarily committed to finding their way to even a small set of facts they could both agree on. How did you handle that, and did you find it was getting harder as the years went by?
Well, usually not well. Because that was increasing. I mean, look, as long as I've been covering politics, and as Andy says, it goes back to the Carter. I came to Washington covering Jimmy Carter. I had covered him when he was governor of Georgia. So I've covered politics for over 50 years. I've covered Democrats and Republicans, debates, discussions, and everything that comes with American politics. And those debates and discussions are all healthy. But when you get to a point, to your first question, where each side comes to the table not wanting to acknowledge even that the other side exists or should be heard or is worth paying any attention to, then how does the audience, the reader, the viewer, the listener, how do they make their own judgment? I can't, hammer the guest over the head and say, all right, tell me, although there were times when I wanted to shake them.
You wanted to do that.
I did want to shake them, but my hope was always, to your question, that somehow people watching, again, listening, following, if they were going to watch it on YouTube the next day or that night, that something would come through to them, that either, okay, both sides have a good point here, or I think that side doesn't sound as authentic as the other one does. That people can make their own decisions, and that has frankly been the mantra of the NewsHour. Our view has always been, we are here to share with you everything we know about this story that we have time to tell you about, but in the end, it's you who are making the decision about what to believe, what to understand.
Right. And it seemed to me that a really good evening was one where you stood up from your chair and turned off the TV and said to yourself, I didn't know that. This was something new that's come in. I've got more to work with now to try to understand this. And, I think that's a great thing to bring to a story, to a broadcast, to a conversation.
And that I credit our founders, Robert McNeil and Jim Lehrer, going back to 1975 when they first went on the air with the McNeil-Lehrer report. It was half an hour. Then in 1983, it expanded to an hour. Their essential philosophy was, we're not here to do opinion. We're here to give you information.
Right.
And every night, you're exactly right. The goal was let's find out whatever we can about this issue, this development, this story that helps the audience have a better understanding of what's
that's
going
to be
on.
new to someone.
Exactly.
Yeah. Judy, I want to read you something that floated across my screen this week from Ian Bremmer's Digital News and Analysis email, Digital G0 Daily. And it just seemed timely that this came across. A reader of his digital news service writes to say that she'd always believed that, quote, our country, for all its flaws, stood for freedom, truth, and accountability. But recently, she said, I felt that foundation crumble. Now, Ian Bremmer responds to sort of unpack why he thinks she might feel this way. And this is what he says. The social media business model is fundamentally incompatible with a healthy civil society. It welcomes bots, promotes extremism, and spreads disinformation precisely because those things maximize engagement. You're not just fighting bad policy, you're fighting a system designed to maximize division for profit. Traditional information networks are collapsing, and the messy middle of democratic institutions is under sustained attack, and younger Americans especially are feeling a disenchantment that's hard to overstate. Would you agree with at least some of those assessments?
I think I agree with all of them.
All of them. Okay.
I think I said a minute ago what I think about the internet. I would times 100 when it comes to social media.
Yeah.
Because more and more we are understanding that the folks who are running these platforms, they're all about increasing clicks,
Yes.
eyeballs, followers. They're not, and there are exceptions to this, but by and large, it's about getting as many people to watch as long as possible, to click on a story, to stay on it as long as possible, to keep people entertained and feeling like, oh, there's something else here. I want to hear about that. Rather than being dedicated to what I've learned as a brand new journalist and what I've tried to follow throughout my career, which is journalists are here and information is here to help the American people understand what's going on around them in their community, in their city, their state, the country, the world. We're here to inform,
Right.
and to and we all know most of the media is commercial. It's commercially based, but increasingly with the technology the way it is all about the dollar, and it's all about maximizing profits, getting as many people to watch, listen, follow, read, click, as for as long as possible, and as Ian Bremmer said, how is that compatible?
Right.
How is
right.
that compatible with informing as many people? I'm sure you've got other questions along this line. I mean, the question that immediately raises is, what are we going to do about it?
Right.
So
Well,
I'll let
here's
you
a
ask the question.
suggestion that he continues to respond to this person
Yeah.
who wrote in with this kind of despondent, but logically despondent view of where we're going. But he advises her to, and this relates to why we're all here tonight, he advises her to stay local. National politics, he says, feels like screaming into the void because increasingly it is. But local politics, school boards, city councils, state races, still have leverage points where individual voices matter disproportionately. It's less glamorous, but it's where you can actually see cause and effect. It's where the most consequential fights over voting access, education, and civil society are happening right now. So you've been reporting on local news, which is great news to all of us who are working in this, side of the media business. And do you sense some of that when you're hanging out with a local newspaper and its staff?
Well, for sure. And I don't pretend to be an expert on local news, but I have focused on it. As you see, there was a report that you showed a little bit of a minute ago. There was also a report we did before that one aired, where we visited the panhandle of Texas, a small town called Canadian, of all things, Texas, where a newspaper had been in the Brown family for something like 50, going on 60 years. The dad was the editor, publisher, main reporter. His daughter would describe it as he died at his desk because he devoted all of his life to that newspaper. She then picked up the mantle. Her name was Lori Brown. She kept it going for 30, almost 40 years until all the forces that we've been describing, the assault basically on journalism at the local level, made it harder than ever. She was putting out a 46-page weekly newspaper with 2 people helping her. She was the photographer, the editor, the writer, one of the 3 reporters, and everybody did 4 or 5 jobs at one time until it became unsustainable. And I have to share with you, one of the people, we interviewed a number of people in the community about what it meant to them to lose the Canadian Record, the name of this paper. And I'll never forget, one of the gentlemen was a very politically conservative rancher whose family had been in Canadian forever, for a long time, decades. And he was in tears as he talked about, he said, I didn't necessarily agree with her editorials because she leaned a little bit to the left, not dramatically so, but she would occasionally write about something national and he didn't always agree with it. But he said, this was the newspaper that was the glue in my community. I read about births, marriages, deaths, and the police blotter, and the paper was, this was the paper that wrote about where Lori recognized that the town needed a senior citizens home and they needed the community to come together to raise revenue for that. There was an intersection where there had been a lot of accidents. She advocated for their first stoplight, and all sorts of local issues. But the rancher, I'll never forget, his name was Steve Rader. He said, and he took me over to a table where he had all these clippings of his children, his grandchildren playing for the high school basketball team, football team. He was so proud of all this. And he said, now that's gone. And what we know from talking to the academics, and you all know this, is that, and Andy referred to it, is when you don't have local news, people are less engaged. They don't know the other people in the community. They don't know what's going on or as much about what's going on, and they don't feel they have a stake in it. And so...
it's one of those things that you just feel like local paper goes under, there's nothing good about it.
There's
nothing good about a news desert.
And everything, and the polarization is worse because people do turn, to your point, to national news. A lot of it, cable TV or the internet, podcasts. Some of the podcasts are fabulous, like the one Al does every week with James Carville. And there are a number of good outlets out there, but there's also the toxic stuff. And so you can turn on, I'll let you name the channel, any channel you want to name, and people are yelling at each other and calling each other names. And people, the national news is now characterized as a fight. A fight over, right versus left, D versus R, invective after invective. And when that happens, people are like, look at your neighbor down the street, if she's a D and he's an R, then I don't think I want anything to do with them. Whereas if you know people and you know more about them, you're less likely to have those feelings.
You run into them in different contexts and you see them different places. And, writing in a small community like this, I knew what the experience was like initially when I wrote a story, I can't remember about what, I think it might have been the county budget. Somebody taps me on the shoulder in church and says, that was a good story, but have you thought about such and such? And, you know, I mean, it wasn't a fight. It was just, that was great. Here's another idea you might check out. Here's something, and your sources and your subjects are kind of weaving through the streets.
And there's local accountability,
and
frankly.
local accountability.
I mean, Lori Brown in Canadian Texas would say, you know, she'd go to the drugstore and people would stop her and
Right.
comment on something in the paper, or they'd give her an idea for something
Yeah,
that she
exactly.
needed to know about. That's the kind of thing that happens. And I don't want to make it sound like it's all perfect when there's a local paper, but there's much more of that community connection when there's local journalism
Yes.
than, and you know, you all know the backdrop here. We've lost, I think this is correct, 3,300 newspapers in the last 20 years in this country have gone out of business, and there are many more that have shrunk. They don't have the ability to cover the news. They don't have the staff to cover the news. I mean, we're now dealing with this very much at the national level, and I can tell you, as someone in public media, we're dealing with our own challenges right now. So journalism overall is in a tough place. But one of the things we can do is to do exactly what you're doing here in Rappahannock, and that is focusing on local journalism and supporting local journalism the way the Foothills Forum does.
And do you think there's a nonprofit angle that comes through when you think about a way to do that? Does your mind go to, surely there must be some nonprofit arrangement that could be set up in these various towns similar to what we've got here?
Well, oh my gosh, I love this bug. What is that? A millipede.
Right.
He's
You're in
cute.
the wilds.
He is. He's trying to get away from the. I don't profess at all to be an expert on the business model. I mean, I do know that the business model's tough. It's, you know, what happened to papers was clearly people could get the news for free, so why should they pay it for a subscription? That happened, and then advertisers thought, well, if people aren't reading, then I'm not going to run my ads, and
Yes.
it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and here's where we are today. I think we're seeing a combination. I mean, the woman you saw in Ann Adams, who was the editor of the paper, you saw a profile there. She's trying to do it without nonprofit support.
Yes.
She's charging $5 a week for that newspaper. Some people, and she said a lot of people are supporting it, but not everybody has as much, you know, $25 a month, $25 a month. And multiply that times whatever it is a year.
Right.
And the other thing we know, and I'll just say this quickly, Tim, is that there are now at the national level a number of really important efforts on the part of foundations, nationally and locally, like here in Virginia, to support journalism. It used to be people never thought about journalism when they thought about philanthropy. They thought about, you know, the theater, the opera, the museum, the library. Today, journalism is in that category. We are now in the category of those, what I call a public good that needs to be supported. And it used to be that the model worked, the business model worked, but it's collapsed. And we have there was one mention in that segment about maybe an answer is some sort of subsidy, but we're not there yet. And I would argue we're even farther away from it at this moment.
Yeah, that's not there yet. I'd like to pose a question to my former bureau chief, who is also your husband. Is that okay?
Make it really difficult.
Okay. I'll do my best. And there's a microphone nearby. So, Al Hunt, you were the bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal for a good while. You hosted Sunday morning talk show, Political Capital. You were a weekly panelist on CNN's Capital Gang. All these things, columnist at Bloomberg View, the editorial arm of Bloomberg News. And you have a deep understanding of the large media organizations, because you worked with a lot of them, and how they navigated a complex environment in Washington. Political leaders were often critical of the press, and they might restrict our access and otherwise make it difficult for reporters to do their job. But today, the president regularly accuses the media of running fabricated fake stories, not just unfairly critical articles, but untrue articles, fake articles. The FCC chair tries to muscle a comedian off the air because the president and his team disliked what he said. And the Wall Street Journal, for its part, has been sued by the president for $10 billion for running a story about a bawdy letter he sent to a sex criminal on his 50th birthday. Are we in different territory today? It sort of seems that way, does it?
Tim, I'm a little bit nervous to answer the question when I learned on the way down from Andy that this county voted 62% for Donald Trump. So with that caveat, let me just say there are days. My first 5 years in Washington were during the Nixon administration, and there are days that I look up at the heavens and I say, forgive me, it really wasn't as bad as we thought it was back then. You know, we ran, when Kathy Trost and Tim Carrington were in that Wall Street Journal bureau when Ronald Reagan was president, and I think we did a lot of good stories, and they liked some, they didn't like others. No one ever said you're the enemy. No one ever said that, you know, this is really, we're out to get you. So the idea that it's ideological, I think, is just so wrong. There are a lot of things that bother me that's going on with this administration. It bothers me to see ICE, masked ICE people helicoptering into the top of the building and then going and throwing little kids out on the street at 1 a.m. in the morning. It bothers me that you know, NIH scientists who may be the ones that discover a cure for cancer are being tossed out. It bothers me that New York law firms are capitulating to what is a shakedown. I would point out the number of Washington firms led by Wilmer Hale and supported by people like Brendan Sullivan have stood up and they win. But parochially, what bothers me the most is what I think this administration hopes to do to the press, which is really, if we think we're in trouble now, to make it worse. I mean, the suits that they brought against CBS and ABC, that they both caved, were frivolous. There's no way that, you know, I have a good friend who's one of the great libel lawyers. You remember Bob Sack at the Wall Street Journal. These cases were frivolous. George Stephanopoulos on ABC made a careless remark. That wasn't defamatory. They would have won that case easily, but for money reasons, Disney caved. CBS, I've read that transcript of the Kamala Harris interview. You know, you can argue whether the editing was good or bad, but a public official can't sue on whether they disagree or agree with an editing decision. And to their great credit, you know, the Wall Street Journal and the Des Moines Register and Ann Selzer have stood up. But what this administration hopes to do eventually, and we've talked about the huge economic problems that our business faces anyway, they hope to undo the famous Sullivan decision in 1964, which is the great protector the press has, which basically says when it comes to a public official, if a public official has to prove that he or she was defamed, and they have to prove not just a factual error, which happens all the time, I mean, everybody tries to avoid it, but they have to prove that there was malice and a reckless disregard of facts. And when they undo that, that really takes it away, and yeah, it'll affect maybe the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post at times a little bit. It'll really affect little papers all over the place. And I would just say in closing, I think they're short-sighted, because if I look at the national level, man, Fox News is in real trouble if that happens. And there are a number of others, but this administration doesn't care. And I've never seen anything like it, and I had issues with some of the things that Richard Nixon did, but there were a lot of people in that administration that cared. And the same thing with Reagan or Obama or Clinton. It's hard to find someone in this administration that cares.
Thank you.
Can we have a 38% here?
Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you, Al. Judy, just to get back to something that's obviously close to your heart, and that's public media.
Yeah.
So this month started a whole new world for PBS, and how do you feel it's going, and what are your thoughts about the future of public media, which I think all of us care about?
Well, I think you're referring to the end of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the end of federal funds for public broadcasting, something that goes back to the Kennedy and then Johnson administrations, when Lyndon Johnson signed the public media, the legislation that brought public media, television and radio into existence. It's a very difficult time, and the stations that are being hurt the most are those stations that represent the more remote rural parts of the country, which frankly depend more than anywhere else on these radio and television, but in some of the very remote areas on that for news. I'll just give you a quick example. Last night, in the last few days, you may have seen in the news, there was a terrible storm, a huge storm in western Alaska. The station, the only news outlet in that part of Alaska, KYUK, radio and television, public media. Last night on the NewsHour, Jeff Bennett interviewed the woman who's the manager, and she talked about all the impact on the community, how many people have had to be evacuated, how they're dealing with it, the long-term effects. And Jeff asked her at the end, and how are you doing this at a moment when resources are diminished? And she said, we're doing the best we can, we're tightening our belt, and she said, and we will be going out of business, that they cannot keep going. So that's just one example of what's going to happen across the country in places that depend on public media for their information. Yes, stations like WETA in Washington, WNET in New York, WGBH in Boston, stations on the West Coast, the big cities, we're going to make it. The NewsHour is not going away. WETA isn't going away. We are having to work harder because we've lost millions and millions, 1.1 billion overall, spread around with everybody. But for us, it's $10 million, and that's not something you make up overnight. I'm glad to report that many of our donors, our viewers, people who follow us, are stepping up and writing checks, and that's happening, but there's a lot more that we need to keep doing, and we need to keep doing it every year in order to keep doing the kind of what we think is essential reporting to keep the American people informed. That was why public media was founded in the first place. Newton Minow, who was John F. Kennedy's chairman of Federal Communications Commission, said we need a place for Americans to get news and information that is about informing the American people and lifting us up as a people, and not just about the commercial imperative, who can make the most off selling the most widgets and so forth. So.
Well, thank you for that update, Judy. We're all in this together.
Thank you.
It's
Can
not easy.
I add one thing?
Yes.
Judy mentioned the FCC, and you earlier mentioned the current FCC chairman, who engaged in the shakedown of CBS and the others. When Newton Minow was FCC chairman in 1961, President Kennedy called him one day and said, "Did you see that awful piece on NBC last night? Do something about it." And the next morning, Minow called Kenny O'Donnell, President Kennedy's assistant, and said, "Kenny, would you please tell the president that he's fortunate to have a friend at the FCC who disregards the president when he's angry." That wouldn't happen today.
We need that. We need that. I want to jump to something else that's very much in the economic and business pages of the papers and on our minds, and that's artificial intelligence. On your way out here, you drove through what is widely recognized as the epicenter of the computing power behind artificial intelligence. There's 600 some data centers in Northern Virginia. They've transformed parts of the Piedmont landscape.
We drove by a few.
Though not in this county. But people are concerned about the loss of farmland, the loss of landscape, and the dramatic effect it's going to have on electricity rates, because voracious need for electricity. But I want to ask you what you think AI means for the news business.
Well, we're finding out. We're just beginning to find out. We're frankly madly trying as fast as we can to learn as much as we can. At the same time, we're covering the news, which is coming at us at a pace like we haven't seen in a long time. And so my colleagues at the NewsHour, I don't profess to be the AI expert person at the NewsHour, but my colleagues are already looking at ways to use AI for research. Having said that, Tim, we want to be super careful because, to go back to your first question, it's all about the facts.
Yes.
And AI is, in my view, still not a reliable source of information. If I want to know what's going on, really going on in a story, I'm not going to rely just on what AI is telling me. I may go there to find out what their take is, what they're saying, but I'm going to check it against a number of other sources, and I'm certainly not going to write a news story based on AI. I don't trust it. Maybe we'll get to a point where we can go to AI and learn everything we need to know, and there's no question, it's convenient. You Google something now, and I guess it immediately goes to AI, which makes me suspicious. But
I'll tell you a story. We were visiting a nephew this past weekend in the Boston area who's involved with biotech, and he assembles a lot of information about biotech things, and he's beginning to use AI. And he got something from them, and he then was looking at the sources that they used to pull together the information that they shared with him. And one of them was The Onion. Now, AI doesn't have a sense of humor, and so they don't really know when something is a joke, but they just took that as seriously as, At the same time, I'll say, I was doing a story about how Medicaid cuts are going to affect this part of Virginia, and I wanted to know how many Virginians depend on Medicaid for their health care. I got an answer, but they told me where it came from, and so I could go to the website of a organization that credibly follows healthcare stuff and see that, so this isn't really AI, it's not the data centers in Fauquier County that came up with that. It's, they're passing on something that had credibility.
If we're able, to the extent we're able to check the source, what's the source, and to know that we can trust whatever AI platform we're using. And we all know AI is going to be able to do amazing things. I mean, they tell us in medicine and science, it can go through a lot of document, a lot of data research, and come up with answers. But again, for journalism, we're supposed to be about the facts, and I would want to be very, very careful. At least today, and at this point in 2025, about AI.
It's kind of odd to hear them explain, the people involved in AI, that, sometimes there's a hallucination. And I think that doesn't exactly build confidence, does it? But anyway, I've got one more question to pose to you before we then turn to all our friends here to ask questions that have things on their mind. I'm thinking about when you came up from Atlanta and you were following Jimmy Carter's campaign and you come to Washington, and it's a long time ago. But imagine a young person, sort of like you, who's very interested and motivated and highly committed to pursuing a career in journalism. What would you tell them today? What advice would you have to that person, somewhat like you, who's trying to do the same sort of things today?
I say to them, and I get a chance to talk to them quite often, and I say to them, look, if you're interested in what's going on around you, if you're curious, if you're willing to work long hours and not get paid a lot, because especially the new journalism is lean and mean, jump in, the water's fine. We need you. We need as many young, smart, motivated reporters as we can possibly get. I can't guarantee you what the thing looks like, where you're going to be working, whether it's going to be radio, television, print, on social media, or something that's going to succeed Twitter and TikTok and X, I should say, and TikTok. There's going to be the next iteration of all these things. So I can't tell you what it looks like, but we are always going to need information. We need information. We need reporters to go and gather the facts. Yeah. We need that as a democracy. We can't survive as a democracy without that. And so I love meeting young people who are saying, I'm thinking about going into journalism. I don't know what's going to happen. I said, look, if you're curious and you're willing to work long hours and you're going to meet, you know, Al has some great stories about this, but if you want to meet interesting people every day of your life, and no day is like any other day. I mean, I think I've died and gone to heaven being a reporter. I love it. I mean, you get to go up to people and ask them all kinds of questions and hope they're telling you the truth. You know,
it's the least repetitive work you can ever do, because every day is different. And I mean, think of the day you came to work and planes had plowed into buildings in New York. Did you have any idea that would happen? I mean, obviously but not. Other things too that are, you know,
stunning.
But the sense of, you know, the world is turning in strange ways, and prepare to be surprised. So I think it's time that we turn to you. You're great to have come here, and I know you all have things on your mind you'd like to raise. There are people with microphones. Emily?
We have 3 mics. Yes.
And we'll do this for maybe 15 minutes, or, you know, as long as it...
Not working. You know, you can just shout your question if you want to.
Yeah.
I think I wasn't being noticed because my question's not well formed, but I'm going to give it a go. With all the consolidation of media outlets under these bigger companies that seem to have a certain allegiance, and, you know, makes it concerning what they might cover, I have a question that, Judy, you may have an opinion on, but the former Wall Street Journal, I'm curious what you think with the Murdoch empire that has been in place for a bit, the relationship, if there is one, between the Fox News Channel and the Journal, the reputations are so different, and I realize a lot of this just comes down to money, you know, how much money everybody's making, but is there any behind the scenes connection, coordination, disdain, appreciation for what the other is doing?
I'm going to turn to Al because he worked at the Journal. Well, both of you can talk about this.
First, I left the Journal shortly before Murdoch bought it. I wasn't prescient. I didn't know he was going to buy it. And I thought it would be a disaster. It has not been. The Journal is still a great paper. I've had some quibbles occasionally, but they do great stuff. I think Murdoch has it both ways. He loves to make money, and Fox makes a lot of money. And they make a lot of money by being what they are. And he really has contempt personally for Trump. He thinks he's dumb. And so therefore the Wall Street Journal, including the editorial page these days, are able to really, I think, please the owner in that sense. And he's gotten away with it very effectively so far. And I think he was probably privately, I'm just conjecturing now, privately pleased when Trump, you know, had that ridiculous suit again. By the way, it's already been proven the story was right. I mean, it's come out. So that's at least my take on and I still have enormous respect for the Wall Street Journal. Tim, I suspect you do too.
Absolutely.
And I think Kathy Trost would say.
And I think Murdoch has brought some good things to it. I love reading. It's they've got photographs are fabulous. The international coverage is great. It's very newsy. It's, you know, it's a really different paper when we got started there. But I think he saw value in it, and that's why he wanted to own it. He didn't want to own it because he wanted a print version of Fox News. He wanted to
Or the
own
New
it.
York Post.
Or the New York Post,
Yeah.
which were all his properties. He wanted to own it because it was something he didn't already own, and it had a sense of quality and people
Prestige.
that followed it.
Prestige.
Tim, you and Judy started this off by talking about facts, and since the alternative set of facts occurred several years ago, I have a friend I consider him a friend. He and I have political differences from as far left to as far right as can be, but he said to me the other day that his real problem was that he could never understand why there are no facts that he could latch onto. Do you have an explanation or perhaps a suggestion as to what I can tell him? If I say to him, well, watch PBS, what he probably does is watch Fox. And the dichotomy between what I think is balanced news under PBS and what I think of as slanted news under Fox is so great that I just don't know how to travel above that chasm.
Thank you for the question. I think many Americans, well, we know that trust in the media overall, the news media, has dropped considerably in recent years, and it does have to do with the rise of opinion, the platforms that are only about point of view, advocacy, opinion, to the point that people don't know, as you say, if that's what they're watching or reading or listening to most of the time, they're not aware of other information. I tell people, of course I tell people to follow the NewsHour. I also tell people, I said, or if you can, follow a number of different news sources. In a way, it's a luxury because a lot of people are, they're busy raising their kids or working and putting food on the table and holding down 2 or 3 jobs, and they don't have time to. But to the extent you can follow different sources, you can come away with a sense of who's, where you're getting the straight story or something close to the straight story. Yes, I mean, I'd like to say with the NewsHour, because I know the way we vet our stories. We check everything out. We hate to make mistakes. For even one of my Crossroads pieces, there are 3 people going over it, fact-checking, because we hate to make mistakes. Sometimes we do. Something slips up. When it does, we acknowledge it and admit it. That's not a process that all news organizations or opinion organizations go through. They just want to get the point of view out. But I think I would say to your friend, listen to your friend. I'm a big advocate of telling people to listen to each other, but to read and watch several different news sources and see if he can't come to appreciate that there are facts out there somewhere. But it's a hard thing right now that all of us are dealing with.
But I think there is a sense of something really happened, something's really true. Somewhere, if you talk with enough people, you'll get to a sense of what was really going on. And I think we have to believe that, and we have to work as hard as we can to get to that and to share it once we've gotten it, with our readers, with our communities.
Good way to put it.
I wonder if I may ask a question. So 30 years government career, congressional executive branch, and during my time, you and definitely during your distinguished career, you watched the news media once be a source that you relied on, and as you and Tim have talked about, it's turned into a social media world where TikTok and Facebook are telling us to think. And I worry that there's not a solution to this problem. I mean, the world's going to continue to go to that direction. We all love our TikTok. We all love our reels on Facebook. And I largely think media has been a big problem that has created a lot of the divisiveness. As a guy who worked in Congress, you watched members of Congress become more and more prominent because they knew how to use social media. And that's where we are today. What is the solution to this problem? Can we find our way out of this?
Yeah, well, it's $1 million question. How do we find our way out? I have to believe that not just the next generation, but the one after that, they're gonna be working on this. I mean, you already see in a small way school systems saying students can't bring their devices to school. We're trying to get young people to focus at a very early age on studying and not being glued to the screen, which has done so many, in my view, harmful things to all of us. So I think that's part of it. It's clear to me that we have gotten away from, because of this change that we're talking about, and to your question, we've gotten away from knowing that there are places that there's no Walter Cronkite anymore. There'll be this place that we know, or John Chancellor, where we know we can watch that network or read that that newspaper, and we know we're going to get information. There certainly are places to go, but too many Americans don't have time to go there. So I think we're going to have to teach more what they call media literacy in school. That's something that is developing. It's in its nascent stage right now. But I know a number of academics who are working on this and trying to push this out to school systems. You need to teach young people at a very early age. You know, here are two stories. Which one rings true, to your point? Which one makes sense? And having them say, when you read something or you see something, ask yourself, does that sound right? And they're doing this with children as young as 4, 5, saying, when you hear this or read this or see it, does that sound like it's really right? Did it really? And getting people to think, to be skeptical listeners and viewers and readers. So not an easy task, 340, 50 million Americans. We're not going to turn this ship around quickly, but there's so much at stake. There's so much at stake. Again, I mean, I've said it a minute, our democracy depends on information that's accurate, on facts. So we've got to work on this, and we can work on it in our schools, in our and in the way we teach the next generation. There's a lot on the shoulders. Those of you, I see some of you over there who I call the younger generation, right over there. It's on your shoulders. And I'm looking around the room. You're all young. What am I talking about?
Right. We're all young, yeah. A somewhat depressing story was that several years ago, 4 years ago, Andy, 5 years ago, we thought we at Foothills will make a gift to the senior class at the Rappahannock County High School of giving every member of the senior class subscription to the Rappahannock News. And we'll follow up and talk with them about what they're reading and get their sense of things. The entire class got back and said, no thanks.
Well, this is how they get their news.
We're asking them to do something very strange. They don't do it with their bodies. They don't know how to turn the pages.
But they are digital. I mean,
they're digital, and we don't
digital.
have a digital. But we've got, thanks to Ireland Hayes, who's one of those people we would call young, who works in our group. She's doing more digital, more interviews, and getting things more online.
Yeah.
So we think that'll make a difference.
Judy, can I just? Could I? Yeah, this works. So we're living in a post-factual world on the national level, as you said at the beginning of the talk, which essentially means we're living in a post-journalism world.
I hope not. But.
Well, I feel very optimistic. You know where journalism is going on is at the local level, because the facts are there. The facts aren't about abstract policy. It's actions that are being taken at the Board of Supervisor level, at the Planning Commission level, at the local police station level. And so the facts are real, and they have a vibrancy to them because while they only apply to the local jurisdiction like Rappahannock County, they actually have impacts to the broader community. And so the question that I have is actually quite simple. One way of helping local news stations is if the national media picked up local stories. As reported in the Rappahannock News, and then give the story that way. And I would say amplify and showcase local media as an example of how important that factual reporting still is. Because when it gets confused with broad policy issues, you know, everybody can choose whatever facts they want depending on who they're listening to. But at the local level, the facts are the facts. And so you get a real journalism. And Rappahannock News does a terrific job of that. Thank you.
It's such a great observation. I'm not ready to give up on national news because that's what I do. But I have been, as you can see, traveling around the country for almost 3 years, and I'll continue to do it next year, highlighting what is going on in local communities and sharing it with the broad, the national public, I mean, our national audience. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the facts are easy, not easy, but easier to get your hands around and to explain. And you know, the water shortage is this, or it isn't, or the tax rate is or isn't going to go up, and here's what our local schools need. Those questions are concrete, and you can also argue about them, and communities are arguing. People in the local communities are arguing about what books ought to be on the shelves of the local middle and high schools. That's happening, and people are also arguing about how to teach race, the history of race in this country. So there are arguments that are happening and disagreement over, I don't know if you could call it facts, but over how to view history. And yet, I mean, I absolutely get your point, but I'm not ready yet to give up on what we're doing nationally.
Okay, one more question, or two more questions.
Is this on? Judy, thank you very much. I wanted to ask you about truth. I think when most of us grew up, we all believed that truth was somehow indivisible. There was opinion, but there was truth. And nowadays, people talk about my truth, your truth, and somehow truth has become opinion. And I was talking recently to a Trump supporter who is an intelligent guy. I respect him, not my politics at all. And his view of what was going on in the media, in the universities, in the judiciary was summed up in 3 words, which is, it's our turn. It's our turn because what you, Caroline, say is the truth, by which you mean the sort of cultural norm, has actually been for 50, 60 years a liberal norm in the universities, a liberal norm in the judiciary, a liberal norm in the media. And we've all had to live with that. And now it's our turn to make sure those norms are our norms. And I wondered what you think about this idea that somehow truth is now divisible. And I know that there are opinions, I know there are facts, but it's a fundamentally different way of looking at the concept of truth. And until we wrestle with that and sort of come out of that, we're going to have this mess going on where everybody views the world differently and are prepared to rush to the barricades to defend their view.
Yeah, such a wise observation and question. I mean, I break your question into 2 parts about in terms of truth. I mean, to me, you know, people talk about, I have journalist friends who talk about, I'm here to get the truth. I refer to it as the facts, because all I can do as a reporter is look for evidence, information, numbers, data, what somebody said about what happened, and that's facts. Am I going to get to the final truth? I mean, on when 9/11 happened, did I know the truth of what happened that day? No, it's something we're striving for all the time. We're trying to get to that. I don't think that's exactly the truth that you're discussing, but that's how I think about truth. In terms of, you know, was the country moving to the left? Did the liberals take over? I mean, look, there's no question that the universities in our country, many of them have moved to the left, and the big, best-known universities that are great centers of learning in America that have educated so many important people have become places where conservatives aren't welcome. We know that's happened, and there's now a pushback going on. The media, I will say, there's no question that a lot of journalists go into, I think, or reporters go into reporting because they want to make things better. They're curious, they want to know what's going on, but they also are thinking, where there's injustice, let's shine a light on it and do something about it. When someone's not being treated well, when people are not being fed, when housing there's a shortage of housing, it's too expensive, name the issue. When people aren't getting the health care they should, that we need to shine a light on that. And that often involves government action to step in, to fix or improve those situations. So I've seen that, we've all seen that in national journalism. Not completely, but I think in large part. And I think today, over the last, 10 or 15 years, and I can't put a date on it, there are more journalists coming in, reporters coming into the business who do lean conservative and have the attitude of your friend. Well, it's time, for people who don't think government is the answer to do more of the reporting. I think it clearly is part of the genesis for Fox and its popularity and other conservative outlets. And yet, I fear we're boiling it down to something that's too simple when we describe it this way. It's not like we were all going left and now we're all, it's not that simple. And yet there is a kernel of truth in what your friend observed. And I think, I'll just say one other thing. In my view, I have a strongly held view that for the longest time, we reporters in Washington have been in a bubble. We've stayed too close to the city that we live in. You've heard about pack journalism. We all talk to each other. It's not that we never get out there and talk to the American people, but we haven't done it enough. It's one of the reasons we completely missed Donald Trump's victory in 2016. And we need to be doing more of that. It's one of the reasons I want to, it's not like I'm goody two-shoes, I'm the best person. I'm just saying that it's one of the reasons I really wanted to get out and do the reporting I've done for the last almost 3 years. We need to get out more. Washington is not the fount of all wisdom. I think there's way too much attention on the White House. I've thought this for a long time. There's a lot more going on in the country, to that gentleman's point about local. We need to pay more attention to what's going on in the states, in localities, to the extent it can be made relevant to people in other parts of the country. I mean, there's some risk in just doing local, because people have to say, well, what does that have to do with my community and mine? So it's my long-winded way of saying we have work to do in this area, and I think all of us in the press have a responsibility to do that. But the answer is not to just wholesale throw everything out that we've done and say, well, it's all not to be trusted. The New York Times, the networks and public media, you failed us. Yes, we've dropped the ball in a number of ways, but we are trying to get it right. And I know, I know good reporters at Fox News. I mean, the woman who covers the Pentagon for Fox is a good friend, Jennifer Griffin. And I mean, so it's not simple. It's not as black and white as we sometimes make it. But it's a wise question, as I said. Thank you.
Chuck. Okay, I'll go ahead. Next to you, Mike? Okay.
How is it that I get to pick? Well, how do we pick? I have a team of very smart producers. We started out with 2, now we have 3, and then we went back to 2. Now I have 1, but I'm going to have more. They have been endlessly helpful to me. We are scanning the landscape all the time, reading local news, by the way, reading newspapers from across the country digitally, because that's the way we can follow, and trying to just absorb as much information as we can, and then deciding, okay, is this in the first 2 years where we were trying to look for examples of division in America, is this an example, and how are people dealing with it? This year we've been looking at communities that are divided and yet they're trying to work to come together. So we're looking for examples of that. We're talking to people all the time who work on these issues. Some of our stories have been around talking to historians, academic people who've written books about division, polarization. So it's an organic process. It's kind of like what every reporter does. You just collect and collect and collect, and then you have to make a decision about what are we going to do, and are we going to do it this month, and can we do it next month? That's not a very clear answer, I'm sorry. But it's a good question.
It's not that scientific, is it? You sort of get up and there are all these possibilities of things you might write about. And then, we have a meeting every 2 weeks and it's the staff of Foothills and the staff of the paper. And we say, what's everybody hearing, asking about, bringing in. And it's by the end of the conversation, there are 2 or 3 things that have emerged as really important, and we better get them done in the next week. And it happens. The wire breakfasts at the Wall Street Journal. I wanted to say one thing though, Caroline, in response to that very, very important, interesting question about, we shift from a group of people who want this to a group of people who want something else. And I remember a conversation during the pandemic that got together a bunch of people who worked for the Wall Street Journal by Zoom, and everybody was catching up. It was mostly a lot of people who worked in the New York bureau. But somebody said there, what was important about the Journal is that nobody cared what we wanted, what the reporters wanted, how we wanted to see the world. I mean, we wanted things, I suppose, everybody does. You can't strip that off your psychology. But what they cared about was not what we wanted, but what we knew and how we knew it. So what was most real? That, right? Yeah. That was the most important thing. It was what we really knew. And could you depend on it?
The only other thing I'll say to your question is that we went into this project, I said we want to be as geographically diverse. We want to go all over the country. We want to go rural. We want to go urban. We want to talk to people of all racial, ethnic, religious backgrounds, and just make it as best we could a mirror, holding a mirror up to the country. And you can't ever do that perfectly, but you're always trying to do that. You're trying to show something that is America, a part of America, and showing it back to the American people so that they can understand their country better. And I will say, we did go to Northern Ireland, 2 stories we just did, reminding Americans what can happen when there's the terrible, of course, sectarian violence they fell into, but then they managed to come together. So,
Barbara, did you have something you wanted to?
Although I may be standing between you and dessert, so, but I just want to make a comment, then a question. First, a comment, in a sense, we all see what's happening with news, if not the demise, and hopefully that's not too strong a verb, but I feel like sometimes we're entering the dark ages, our version of the dark ages. And then I find myself looking ahead and wondering as we emerge out of that, whether it might be the local news, the 1,000 points of light, that might be the source of our resurgence. So that's a hope I have. Thank you, Foothills Forum. And my question is really to do with what went on over at the Pentagon, with the decision of major news outlets to not acquiesce, to say no. They channeling Nancy Reagan, just say no, and I thought that was an important collective decision, better than what I saw with some of the law firms, if not some of our universities. And I'm just curious what you think might be some of the implications. On the one hand, is this the beginning of the big pushback, or does this look like more combat ahead with our administration?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball. Obviously, I don't know where it's going to go. But I would, though, you use the word collective. I think each news organization made a decision, and I'm thankful that they made the decision that they did, because to me it's unimaginable that news organization would let a government agency have say over what we report. It's just unthinkable. It's not what we have ever done, would ever want to do. And to me, it spoke volumes that Fox and there were several other conservative outlets that said, no way, we're not joining in this. Yeah. So there was one news organ in America, I think it's called One America. They agreed, but everybody else said no. And I think we should take heart. We should take heart from that.
Okay, I think there'll be time to, Jane, okay.
Relate. That's okay. I'll sing. Okay. So my question is, in your crystal ball, young people, I bet 90% in this room have read some of the same books that I read growing up. I know that. But I also work with young people, and I know that they're not reading those same books. Do you see any solutions in your crystal ball of how we, besides taking cell phones away, which I understand, and maybe creating more accuracy in what is reported, in how we turn that corner for young people who don't read?
Well, I actually have a more sanguine view of where we are with young people. I mean, the young people I encounter, sure, some of them are, focused on having fun and doing what they do until they get a little bit older. But a number of them I find are very engaged. I was at a conference this past week that was focused on national service, and there were a number of young people there talking about why they believe in national service. I spoke just a few days ago in Michigan, of all places, at the Kalamazoo. There was a conference, the Council of Michigan Foundations. There were young people there who were talking about what they support. I think that there are, and not 100%, but there are a lot of young people today. They're getting their information differently. They are reading different books. They may not be reading the same classics that we read, but they're informing themselves. And also, I look at college applications, and they're through the roof, aren't they? Yeah. I mean, the cost of college, of higher ed, is also through the roof, unfortunately. But there are young people who are striving to be educated, to want to contribute. So I know that there's a sector that gives us concern, but so many of them, I think, are in a good place to lead this country in the right direction in the future. I choose to be optimistic.
Good, thank you. I think, yes, Paula.
Question the issue of media literacy being taught in the classroom, and the surprise that the high school students didn't want the rap news. I bet they'd read their own newspaper. How about the importance of high school newspapers?
Yeah, and that is on college campuses, in a number of high schools. It is the place that journalists cut their teeth. It's where reporters learn to report. Al reported for the Wake Forest Golden Black. And I meet young people who report for their high school papers. So we need more of that, as a training ground.
Yeah, it trains people to ask and then listen, and that's not a bad skill to have.
That's a great skill.
So, all right. Many thanks to all of you for coming and for your questions and for keeping a conversation rolling that could go on for hours. Many, many thanks to Chuck and Dee for, as always, being so welcoming and so open and so supportive of what we do at Foothills and so many other groups in Rappahannock County do. And Judy, you became a national treasure by asking a few honest questions night after night, not for yourself, but for the rest of us. It was you who told us that Yitzhak Rabin's assassination in Israel had occurred in 1995. You informed us that terrorists had flown planes into our buildings in New York and in Washington. You told us about the financial crisis that staggered the global banking system in 2008. You kept us abreast of a global pandemic that shortened the lives of millions of people in 2020, and you told us about a violent attack on the Capitol to overturn an election. And through these and other crises, you were grounded, reality-based, and compassionate. To many, you were a voice of sanity, conveying between the lines that somehow things would turn out okay. And if they didn't, you would help us understand why. So tonight, Judy Woodruff, you who always ask the right questions, came to Rappahannock County to answer some of our questions. And on behalf of Foothills Forum and everyone here, I want to say thank you, and as you would say, be safe.
Very generous of you. Thank you so much. Thank you.